things that can be problematic, and how is it that we can maybe find better ways to navigate through them. And it would be applicable to friends, be applicable to family, be applicable to our own lives in so many different ways. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. And I want to talk a bit about, like, just this family dysfunction. And that can be obviously to varying degrees. There are some small dysfunctions and there are some very large ones. There's some that are almost like comical. In other words, my dad, just a funny one off the top of my head was he used to cut food in half and then think it was half the calories, but then eat both halves, and that's dysfunction with a really tiny little d. And yet all families have those quirky little dysfunctions, but then there's much larger ones that are much more serious as well and that are hard to navigate through. And how is it that we start to navigate through those? So I want to offer a caution first, and then a possible way to approach it second. So first, on the caution, one of the problems becomes is that dysfunction can become the water in which we swim, and we get so used to it that the family starts to pivot around this particular dysfunction, and it becomes sort of the modus operandi. And how would you know that? Well, you would know that if the conversation, if there's somebody in particular that the whole conversation tends to loop around again and again and again. And Thomas Friedman had a phrase for that. He called it the identified symptom bearer, somebody who all the worries and concerns and angstiness of the whole family system gets focused on this one individual. Now, they may be having dysfunctional behavior, but there's all kinds of other angstiness that kind of piles onto that, and they become almost a lightning rod of sorts. So if you notice in your family systems that there's one name that keeps on coming up that everybody wants to talk about, probably that's something to take a look at and to think, okay, can we break that pattern a little bit so that there's some breath in the system so that things work better. So that's the cautionary tale, is not allowing the whole pivot of a family system to become dysfunction. And again, hard to do because it's the water we swim in. Fish don't know they're swimming in water, but just we can be aware of that. I think there's probably something in the back of our head that's going, oh, this doesn't feel quite right. So then, what's the part that we can move on to? And here are the beautiful words from out of the Beatitudes, from Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. And that blessed are the peacemakers, it's not that we can solve these problems per se, but we have to find our own peace and allow that peace to be something that can then be added to the system. That peace alone can communicate so much. And we know that. We know somebody who they can enter a stormy situation and they just have a certain calm about them. They have a certain peacefulness about them. Again, I preach very often on the word shalom, because shalom is Jewish for peace, but it's this wholeness. It's this all-encompassing holding of it all. And I think that's very much the kind of peace that Jesus would want us to have in our lives, is this all-encompassing peace. So that peacefulness, that holding in the round, so powerful. And when we can do that, when we can come at things with peace, one of the really kind of beautiful analogies that I love is the analogy of a lighthouse. This is courtesy of Anne Lamott. And it's a beautiful analogy, and that's the peacefulness of a lighthouse. The peacefulness of a lighthouse is it's really committed to being in one place. And that's where I feel like when there's dysfunction, and we can find in that dysfunction, we can get really clear on what are the better angels of our nature. The dysfunction's here. We're coming to the better angels of our nature over here. We are not pivoting around it anymore. What we're doing is we are really trying to come from our highest, best selves as God gives us to humbly see it. We're trying to be in that place. And in that place, what does that mean? Well, what a lighthouse does is a lighthouse does a couple of things. First off, it allows ships to come into port so that you're stable, you're steady. And if somebody is living a dysfunctional life, or there's dysfunction in the system, eventually, very slowly, the system will start to pivot towards that more functional way of seeing things. Why? Because that's how our souls are made. Our souls are made to gently ease that direction because that feels home to us. That will feel very much home to us. Now, does that re-navigation, does that realignment happen all the time in this life? I don't think so. I'm sure many times it doesn't happen until the good Lord calls us home. But it's a good journey to at least get started. So again, the lighthouse. And the other thing a lighthouse does is it also helps ships to come out. because people may be in a place where they just can't do it for whatever reason. And a steady lighthouse may be something where it's actually helping them to go on their way, so to speak, for a period of time, noticing that they'll come back to the home harbor, hopefully. But it may actually help them to navigate out of the harbor as well. And that's a painful, true part. But if we look at it from the perspective of eternity, it's actually something really beautiful. Because a lot of the time, spirituality is the art of coming home. And people do bend back around, which is beautiful. And the final word I'll add to this is Anne Lamott's very famous quote that I love citing because I think it's spot on, which is, she said, "No lighthouse ever saved anyone running around a beach." I think that is so true. When we have a dysfunctional thing in our family and somebody behaving in a dysfunctional way, it's really easy to sort of allow the whole system just to collapse into that orbit of dysfunction. And again, the lighthouse all of a sudden gets ripped up from its moorings. We're willing to do anything because we just want to have the peace. We just want to have peace, and it's more from a people-pleasing peace than an actual true peace. And it just the dysfunction of the system just continues. And the reality is we have to keep on coming back to this. Keep on coming back to this. I mean, all of you watching this right now have met a lighthouse person. You've met somebody who they just are so grounded in who they are, so grounded in something higher, and they do it very humbly because that's what God asks us to do. That they're actually really, really easy to navigate by. You sort of know what they're going to say. You know their perspective. You know the spirit that they're going to bring to things. Surround yourself with those people and do the best you can to be one of those people. Because in the long run, and again, I stress the long run, not in the short run, in the long run, that is what will most help to create a system that's more and more functional and more true and more aligned to the better angels of our nature, more and more aligned to the creation that God has made and placed before us. So that's the idea today, friends. So the takeaway, real simple, like just be the lighthouse. That simple, that easy, that hard, all of it together. But figure out what those things are where you're deeply grounded and just really bring that to the system. And don't bring it to the system as a way to punish or change other people. That's turning a spiritual thing into an ego-driven thing where we believe we're in charge. No, just do it. Just do it because it's the right thing to do. End of story. And start to just witness what happens over time. So I hope that makes sense. And what we're going to do now, friends, is as we always do, we're going to shift gears here. And we shift gears by ringing a prayer bell, doing a little meditation from the Old Testament, prayer from the New Testament, closing with a blessing from the Old Testament, and then we say hi to anyone who has left a comment on Facebook this morning. So with that, dear friends, let's get a little breath in the prayer bell. A meditation. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you, bring you peace, bring you home. Amen. All right, dear friends, let's give a little cheery Deary hello here. Say hi to folks. And I hope, again, you're all doing quite well today. That's the big hope. All right, let's see if this computer here is working. Marcus, good morning to you, buddy. I hope you're doing well. And that was a really fun meeting yesterday, by the way. Lots of good laughs. We have a team meeting once a week that Marcus is on, and it is always very enjoyable hanging out with this wonderful team that we have. All right, here's the only comment there. So wishing you folks